something very, very dangerous.
Get these spidey sense, I was like, oh, something's off.
And I'm just like, man, I'm waiting to hear something,
Get that crowd warmed up. Is Mr. Jehovah Tiger.
What's going on, guys, and welcome to another edition. I don't know when this is coming out. It might be the 92nd, 93rd episode. We'll see how it shakes out. But welcome to the Warcry Podcast. I am your host, Jehovah Tiger, and on this wonderful, it's actually kind of nice today. It wasn't as cold. We've been in kind of a freezing type thing, but I am joined. Let's see here if I can get my settings right. Before I get to my illustrious guest on this episode, one thing that I'm trying to be better about this. I'm gonna be honest with y'all. I'm not trying to push as much stuff. Not trying to do a lot of promotion. But you guys can find me. I want to get it all out now. Beginning of the episode. Warcry Pod, X, and TikTok. And then if you want to send me a story, I got 3 really good stories that came in today. From out of Pawnee. Send me your stories at realwarcrypod@gmail.com. Send me those stories. This is Creepy's coming out. This is kind of going to be a Patreon. There's going to be a little bit come out to the podcast, but this episode is going to be a Patreon. So make sure that you subscribe to the Patreon. When you do, which is amazing, it is a 7-day free trial. So you're not going to want to miss it. 7 days free. Now you can go through and every episode's on there from number 1 all the way to 91, I believe. 91? Yeah, anyways. But the gentleman joining me tonight, he joined me back during the Halloween season. I'm so glad to have him back. I would say he's a conspiracy theorist savant. Other people may say that he's a Bigfoot guy. But I'm joined by Mr. Ghostly Hunter from Hunters of the Paranormal. How's it going, man?
It's going well. Can you hear me okay out there?
Perfect.
Awesome. It's good to be back with you. I really enjoyed your show the last time, and I hope you enjoy what I have to say for you tonight. So,
yeah, man. So, for those of you guys that did catch the first episode, it was a live stream. It's on Spotify, Apple, all those places. He had a really good kind of I guess you could say national park ranger type weird situation. It was a really good story. I kept asking him. It was funny. I listened back to it like a couple months ago, and I was like, where's he taking me? I was like, where's he taking? I kept asking you. I was like, but what about the cover up? But he ended up getting to the end, and it was a good crescendo because there's a lot of weird stuff that's going on nowadays. We have a lot of park rangers getting fired. We have different park entities, being let go. But before we get to that, before I ask you that question, before we got, live recording, I guess we're technically live, but we're recording. You had a story about your grandfather.
Yes, sir.
Let's hear that. I want people to hear that because you said it's pretty out there, and I like that.
Okay. I'll try to do you the best I can and the way I remember it. When I was a little kid, I was probably the first time I ever heard about it was when I was 7 or 8 years old, and it was just I heard my mom and dad talking about it, and I caught something about my grandfather meeting someone that basically took him on board a spacecraft and went somewhere. And so, as a little kid, you pay attention to things like that, especially me, because I liked Star Wars and all that. I got to see that in the theaters, as a kid. Grew up on Buck Rogers and Star Trek and, the normal Battlestar Galactica stuff. But I always loved space. And I remember when I was little, I went to I'm privileged enough that I got to meet my great grandmother. and grandfather. And I got to stay there one rare occasion with him. I'd go and see him every now and then. And my dad would go like work on his race cars and stuff. And that's what my grandfather was into, race cars too, as a hobby. But, and I would go over and stay with my great grandmother and grandfather and, just kind of hang out for the day while they're working on stuff. And I remember there was a show back in the 70s, and it was called Logan's Run. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Logan's Run is the one where they live in a dome city, and once you reach a certain age, you basically are terminated at the age of 30, I think, or something like that. But anyway, I tried to watch that show, and it was coming on. I was so excited I was going to get to see that show, and I was just foaming at the mouth as a little kid wanting to watch it. And then my great grandmother and grandfather, they just shut that show off. They wouldn't let me watch it. And I was was kind of mad. Didn't understand at the time. So later on, I find out when I'm about 13, I remembered that story, and we was over at my grandfather's house, and I'll come back to why they turned off the TV with that show anyway. So I'm talking to my grandfather, and I asked him about it, and he starts to go into detail about his encounter. Well, the reason why they had shut that TV off was because they tried to tell him he was crazy, and they mocked him, made fun of him, and they just break him down into tears because he believed it was true. To him, it happened. It was an encounter that he had and an experience that he had, and nobody would believe him. And so I asked him about it, and so this is the story that he told me. He worked in a factory, and my dad had a brother and a sister, and they would have been young. And this would have been around the time. I don't know if any of your listeners out there have heard of Valiant Thor, where they supposedly landed, and he spent like a year or something like in the Pentagon or more. It might have been a little more. But there's a guy by the name of Dr. Frankie Stranges, if anybody wants to look it up, and he talks about Valiant Thor. But it would have been around the same time. And I'm guessing it would have been 59, maybe 60, somewhere in there. And my dad was little, and his brother and sister were little. So my grandfather had 3 little kids at the time. And so he's working in a factory, and he worked in shipping and handling. Like they would load stuff up on trucks and ship it out or whatever. And so this guy gets hired on, and at night it gets kind of slow to where they can talk, and about different things. And so the topic comes up about life in the universe. And my grandfather asks this guy that is just hired on, he said, do you believe that there's could be extraterrestrials or life on other planets or whatever? And this guy looks at my grandfather, and he said yes. He said, I believe that there's extraterrestrials and that there's life. And he said the reason why I believe it is because I am one. And so he tells my grandfather that he was from the planet Venus, and he said like they don't live on the outside of the planet, because it's so hot. But he said they lived on the interior of the planet. And he said like the cloud cover on the outside was basically made by them. They made the cloud cover. So like satellites and stuff couldn't, penetrate the cloud cover to see like their entrances and different things like that. So he talking to my grandfather, and my grandfather's thinking, this guy's kind of odd, and my grandfather's really not buying into it. And so the guy asked my grandfather, he said, if you had an opportunity to, go to another planet, where would you like to go to? And he said, and would you go? And my grandfather said, oh, yeah. He said, I would. He said, I would like to do that. I'd like to go. And he said, my grandfather told him, he said he would like to go to Mars is where he would like to go. And so the guy said, well, if I could arrange it, would you go? And he said, absolutely, I'll go. And so the guy told him, he said, come and pick me up and meet me at such and such, and I'll take you. And so my grandfather, he goes to take him home and drop him off that night. And he said, my grandfather said that back in those days, because my grandfather was familiar with race cars and suspension. Anybody that races knows that suspension is key a lot of times. Like suspension can beat a fast engine if their cars aren't handling right. So my grandfather was into that kind of stuff, and he said back in those days the suspension on the cars weren't very good. So they had a lot of gravel roads, and they were washboard roads. I don't know if you've ever been out in the country and you hit a washboard gravel. It just basically shakes your car to death and about rattle your teeth out of your head. And so he is taking this guy home, and they hit a washboard road, and it's just like shaking the car all over the place. And then all of a sudden the guy looks at my grandfather, and he said, you notice anything different about the car? And my grandfather said, yeah. He said the car smooth, the suspension smoothed out, the road's gotten smoother. And the guy looked at him and he said, no, the road's not smoothed out or gotten any smoother. He said, I'm lifting it up off the ground. And my grandfather said he was making the car using his mind somehow with his mind was making the car lift off the ground smooth, and they were going along. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if I explained that right, but so anyway, they go home, and he lets the guy out, and the guy is showing him over his house. There's these 3 stars, and they in the shape of like a pyramid, like one at the top and 2 at the bottom. And he told him, he said, those are our ships up there. And so he tells my grandfather, come and get him like the next day or whatever, and he'll take him out in the country, and they'll go on board the spacecraft. So my grandfather, he goes, and he picks the guy up. And I got to tell you before that, I'm getting ahead of myself here. The guy told my grandfather that he had never been with a woman. And the reason why they were here was they were doing research. And he said he'd never been with a woman and wondered if my grandfather could arrange for him to meet a woman to be with. And so my grandfather, being a little ornery, I guess, knew where the red light district was and took this guy to a place. I guess you could call it the brothel or whatever. He said they went in, and my grandfather went and sat in like a little room, and the women came in, and the guy picked one out, and they went upstairs. And he said he wasn't up there no more than probably 5 or 10 minutes. And here he comes down the stairs, and the woman's coming down behind him, and she's like looking at him and just shaking her head like in disbelief, And so he couldn't figure out, what had happened. And my grandfather said back then, and even now, like you don't ask people, their personal business, what happened. So he didn't ask. So anyway, they leave. He arranged for him to pick him up, and he's going to take him. And so my grandfather goes, picks him up, and they drive out in the country for a while. And the guy tells him, he says, turn down this little path, like a little dirt road that went into the woods. And so my grandfather pulled the car off, and he headed down into towards the woods through this, little path. And he said inside this woods was like a square meadow. And he said sitting in the middle of the meadow was a classic silver disc UFO shape with the door down. He said they got out of the car, they boarded the craft, and he said there was 3 other ones in there. I think he said there was 3 other ones in there. And he said that to see them, they looked just like us. He said you would never even know that they were extraterrestrials. They looked just identical to us. And so he introduced him to the captain of the ship and everything. And so they boarded, they get settled in. And I think I asked him what it looked like on the inside, and he said there was a lot of panels and lights and different things. And he said they sit him down, and he said they started to take off, and he said it went up in the air. The ship went up in the air, and he said they got above the atmosphere, and he said they could got to where he could look out. And I don't know if he's looking on a screen or a window. I don't remember him saying screen or window, but he said he could see the earth. And he said it looked like a real pretty blue marble looking thing. And he said just just like they flipped a switch or snapped their fingers, he said they jumped from our atmosphere to the atmosphere of Mars. And they're starting to come down into the atmosphere of Mars. So as they're coming down, as they're coming down the atmosphere, the captain and the others start telling my grandfather. They said, as we go down here, we wanted to let you know that there's life down here. And he said, we're going to show you that there's life here, and that there are, creatures that live here. And he said, but in no way, shape, or form are we supposed to make contact. You are not to try to reach out to them, not try to talk to them, nothing. You're not supposed to. We are not supposed to make contact. And so my grandfather said they land, and there's like these. He said there was just boulders everywhere, these great big boulders. And he said they're peeking around these boulders, and there's these cave like things going down into the ground, and here these creatures come up out of this cave. And I asked my grandfather, I said, well, what did them things look like? And my grandfather said, they look like what we would describe here on Earth as a Bigfoot. So I've talked to a Bigfoot hunter that said that the Bigfoot had told people before, the ones that's supposed to communicate with them, that they come from a planet where there's 2 moons. So that I've heard that, and Mars has 2 moons. And I found that interesting later on, of course.
That is definitely interesting. I want to stop you there for a second.
Okay.
Man. Okay. Okay, that's heat. I didn't realize that she was going, I was thinking it was going to be something more or less like he was abducted, but so let me ask you this, and I want to make sure that I clarify this, because my brain is trying to wrap around. I mean, you just dropped a few bombs on us now, man. You just kind of dropped some heat on us there. So did he work with this guy at the factory that he was working at?
Yes, he did. He worked with him, but it's going to get even stranger.
Well, yeah. Okay. Look, before we get there, another question I had is, so this guy just looked like a normal dude, like someone just everyday life.
Yes. If you look if you see the pictures of Valiant Thor, he just looks like he could be either Italian or Greek, like a Greek man. He's like 6 foot tall,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's a woman with him. If you've seen, if you have seen the picture of him, there's Dr. Frankie Strange's has the pictures of him there, and you can, if you type in Valiant Thor, you'll see the black and white pictures of him. And I think it's Highbridge, New Jersey is where they're at. And there was a guy by the name of Howard Menger that also had an experience with Venusians around the same time. So that's at least 2 different ones that I'd heard of before my grandfather. But I had heard that story about my grandfather way before I ever heard Frankie Strange's, and I'll tell you about some stuff that's very similar to what Frankie Strange says here in a little bit. But go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. No.
You're killing it. That's the details I was about to start asking about. And so he looks like an everyday guy. When he picked this guy up, did he pick him up at his house? Did his house look normal?
It was just like an apartment, like.
Okay.
It would have been like an apartment place is where they would have went to.
Okay. And then when he picked him up, they went like in the morning time. They just immediately went in the middle of the day. This thing was out there.
Yeah, that's the way I take it. And he said it was in the daylight. They just pulled up in this woods like in a farmer's field, going back to a patch of woods, and went in there, and there was a little like a little square pasture in there with the UFO sitting right in the middle of it, a disc-shaped object.
And and before we get to the rest of the story, you mentioned Bigfoot. And I know there's going to be a lot of people. We mention Bigfoot anytime, people are going to be asking. I'm just curious, as people hear this story, is anyone out there have heard, what Mr. Hunter is saying about the 2 moons? I feel like I've heard that before somewhere. Do you know if I can't remember? Was it someone that maybe mentioned it?
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. It's a famous researcher, Tom something. Let me see. I may have the book. Can you give me just a second?
Yeah.
Let me look and see if I got the book.
Yeah, and so basically, what I'm kind of curious on to everyone who's going to hear this, have you heard that? Has there been any tribes or nations out there, if you're part of that, have any type of, lore or mythology or stories about the two moons? Because I'm very interested in hearing that, because I feel like I've heard that before. Um, but also too, as we're at the midway point of this story, in the comments below, let me know what you guys think. He's bringing the heat. Okay, he's got the book here.
No, I don't have the book. I actually, the person that loaned me the book, I had to send it back to him. It was a guy that was hunting Bigfoot, and he stopped by and stayed with me, and he had an encounter. Me and him had an encounter here. I took him to a spot, but anyway, the guy's name is his name is Tom. He's an older guy, and he was a surveyor out west, and he's the one. I think he's the one that said that about the two moons. I think that's where I got it from. But
yeah,
I found that
Bigfoot theory is pretty interesting to me. That's something that, if anybody out there, when you hear this, let me know. Shoot me a message or email me, whatever. But let's Mr. Hunter, let's finish on with that story. I want to hear the more strangeness.
Okay, on the way on the trip going there, they basically made my grandfather an offer, and they said, if you want to come and live with us on Venus, we'll take you there. He said, you can live with us for 10 years. And they told him, they said that your brain capacity will be so great when you come back that the person here on Earth with the greatest, highest IQ would have the, what they say, they would seem to have the intelligence of a monkey compared to what you will be able to do. Your mental capacity will be that high, and you'll just have learned that much. And my grandfather, he thought about it, and he thought, no, I got 3 little kids. He said, I would love to go, but he said, I can't. He just said, I can't. I have to take care of my kids. So my grandfather said, no, I can't do that. But they actually offered him to go and stay with them. And on the way there, they also told him, the name of the ship, like the ship captain or whatever. And it told him, the ship captain told him his name. And he told my grandfather, he said, if you or any of your family are ever in any trouble, he said, all you have to do is say my name and we'll be there to help you. We'll come immediately to help with whatever it is. Somebody hurt, dying, or whatever, they'll be there to help. And so anyway, long story short, they are on the surface watching these creatures coming up out of the thing. Looked like Bigfoot, he said. He said they was covered in hair from head to toe. But they had arms and legs just like we do, and kind of humanoid features. And he said he got so excited. Now, this is where it takes a kind of a bad turn, but he said he got so excited that he couldn't help himself. And he said that as that creature was approaching kind of over towards where they were at, my grandfather, he said he just was so excited, and he wanted just to shout out, we're here, there's life on Earth, and I can't believe it. And he tried to go around to meet this thing face to face, which he was told strictly not to on the way there. And as he went around the boulder to come to meet this thing, he was face to face with it, and just immediately it was like he was zapped and blacked out. And he said the next thing he knew, he was bouncing half on and half off of his bed, like somebody had picked him up and threw him on the bed, and he had his clothes on, and he's bouncing up down on the bed, because they've just threw him on the bed and then left. So he goes back to work the next day, and the guy's gone. Like, the guy is not there. It's like he's never been there. Like, nobody even knows who this guy is. There's like no record of him. And my grandfather is thinking he's going crazy. Like, he's going nuts. He's thinking, am I having a mental breakdown or what's going on here? And so he gets to remembering, my grandfather gets to remember that he went to, he took that guy to that brothel where that woman was at, where he went up in the room with the woman, right? And so he thought, man, I got to go and see if she knows anything. And so he goes in there, finds this lady, and he asked this lady, he said, do you remember, I don't know if you days or weeks or whatever back that I brought this guy in here and you guys went upstairs, and she looked at my grandfather and she said, yeah, I remember you and him coming in here. And he said, well, do you mind if I ask you, a personal question? He said, what happened up there, by the way? And she said, it was the weirdest thing. She said, once we got in the room, she said he didn't want to do anything like, physical or anything. All he wanted to do was just interview her, like with interview questions, like, why she did what she did, how she did what she did, like anatomy questions and this and that. So that's pretty much the end of the story there. But one of the things I asked my dad when he was a little kid, I asked him, I said, when you were a little kid, when all that was going on, do you ever remember seeing anything? And he said, my grandfather took him out in the country to show him where all that happened. And when they was driving out into the country where that happened, he said, my dad actually saw a craft come up. I don't know if it come out of the woods or whatever, but it came up and it just hovered. And he said it looked like a silver bullet. And he said that thing just shot off, just like in the blink of an eye, just as fast as you, in the blink of an eye, it shot off. So my dad actually got to see it. And so another weird thing about this whole deal is, in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where he's sitting in the truck and he's reading the map, and you can hear him talking on the radio to the people, and they said, where are you guys sitting at? Or where are you sitting at? And he said, I'm sitting here on Cornbread Road. And if you know about Close Encounters, that show was shot in Muncie, and that's where I grew up, was up around Muncie, Indiana. And the road my dad grew up on was Cornbread Road.
Whoa.
So, and then in the 70s, there was big, like a big UFO sightings around where we lived at. And they had like a UFO, you call it a flap, I guess, where people saw it. And I remember as a little kid standing at the back door, and my parents were outside and they were watching this. The whole neighborhood was watching it. Like everybody was outside in their yards and they was watching these lights at night. They were hovering back over, be to the south of our little neighborhood, and they was just over the cornfield back there. And then my uncle actually saw one come in, and it slowed down, and then it zipped. It kept zipping, jumping, like it would jump from one, I don't know. He said it looked like it jumped about a mile, in the air, as far as you could see, and it zigzagged back and forth, just faster than anything a human could, fly in anything that we've got. So,
man.
And then my cousin, this is another weird. My cousin, when we were little kids, I remember her talking about having a dream about seeing a UFO land behind her house, and they were loading up. Everybody in the neighborhood was getting on board this thing, like they were loading them up on a conveyor belt, taking them into the UFO. And when she said that, it was almost like I had a flashback. And I could see that in my mind just as clear as a bell. I don't know if we all had a mass abduction at that, but that would have been around the time when we were seeing the UFOs there.
So let me ask you this. So he experienced this whole, weird, like, he thought he was crazy.
Yes.
Did he ever see anything, did they ever come back?
Not to my knowledge. He never had another encounter or anything like that. And the weird thing of it was I don't remember him being a real sci-fi fan, other than maybe when he was a kid he would watch Buck Rogers, but later on, like, he was into racing like heavy, like building race cars and different things like that. And he liked sports and stuff like that, but
he's never, a regular dude.
Yeah, he just never. And he didn't, I don't remember him ever drinking alcohol or anything like that. Like, he's a straight shooter. He chewed tobacco. That was the only thing that I knew that he did of, a bad habit, was chewed tobacco. But and at one time he was a Sunday school teacher. I know that doesn't really mean anything, but I'll just throw that out there.
That's such a, I'm trying to process in my head, that's one. Okay, let me ask you this: Do you think that there was some, maybe your dad told you this, or maybe a relative told you this, that like, did he ever have some like reoccurring dreams or anything like that? That was kind of like he was, that his subconscious, it really messed with him or anything like that.
It
Did he
bothered him.
change?
It did bother him to the point where if he he would get emotional talking about it because they shamed him. Everybody shamed him and they made fun of him, and it was like something that he was ashamed of, that like he didn't want to talk about it, if that makes any sense. But I just got lucky as a kid to hear the story. And here's the really cool part about it. I heard it once when I was, like I said, 13. And then I heard it again when I was 19, and I heard it again when I was 23. And never did he change the details. The details never changed. They always stayed the same.
Mm.
And
man, that's just, especially if something, they always, that's one thing about storytelling and remembering, things that happened. And they always say that like the, eyewitness accounts are really not the most credible. Just, things in your memory can change. But there's sometimes, I think, when there's certain things that happen to you and you don't forget it. You will never, like, exactly what happened. And, it sounds like, you heard that story 3 different times. That's that's interesting, and especially that he was kind of I mean, could you tell that his demeanor, like, I guess, like, did you ever ask your dad if he had like a demeanor change, like he just became more depressed, or or he just kind of like put himself into work? You know what I'm talking about? Like, they always say men's depression is working a lot.
I would think that played into a lot of him working and having his hobby as a race car driver, trying to keep his mind occupied. I would say that was probably part of it, but I don't remember him being depressed, like he didn't drink alcohol and nothing like that. He seemed like he was, as long as nobody was bothering him with it. I mean, he seemed like he was all right. You know what I mean? Like he was okay.
Man,
But
that's
I didn't see him like grief stricken or anything. I'd heard my father talk about how he seen him crying because nobody would believe him, and he thought he was going nuts. So
did your dad believe him?
Yeah, I believe my dad did believe him. He had a pretty good grasp on those types of things, and yeah, I think my dad believed him. Yeah, because my dad said he didn't tell stories like that. I mean, that's like unusual for him to even talk about stuff like that. So,
yeah, that's such a great. I mean, as my time on the podcast now, I can remember when someone told me a really, like, my favorite to me, quote unquote, the greatest Bigfoot story. I remember when someone has told me the greatest Dogman story. The story that you just told, I think is the greatest alien encounter with that I've heard. Because I mean, especially here on this podcast, I've had so many people tell me they've seen orbs in the sky, that they've seen people shapeshift. And that story that you just told is a very unique story, and I appreciate you sharing that. But you guys can catch me at Warcry Pod on X and TikTok, and then you guys can find me on. I guess you can email me. I'm only on X and TikTok now. Facebook. Not gonna monetize my kids, but realwarcrypod@gmail.com. Send me your stories. Once again, I appreciate Mr. Ghostly Hunter of Hunters of the Paranormal for coming on and basically lighting the podcast on fire for one time. But I appreciate him, and for everyone who continues to support the podcast, Patreon 7-day free trial. I appreciate you, and I'm gonna catch you on the next one.